Hello and welcome to another episode of Parker's Previews powered by The Hammer. A couple of housekeeping notes before we get started today. I want to make sure you see we're consolidating the college football shows over at The Hammer. So don't go follow Parker's Previews on Twitter. Go follow Hit the Books CFB. You can get that and then a couple other shows with some good betting insight as well over there to make that a little easier so you guys aren't having to run to 5 or 6 different feeds to, find good college football content. We're just putting it all in the same place there. So that should be a little easy for all of us to work with there. Remember, this is a show where we're going to take stats, we're going to take data, we're going to take advanced analytics, we're going to take a deeper dive into the college football betting landscape, and then talk about a couple plays from this week that I like. So got 4 plays today. We're getting ambitious, throwing an extra one on there, see some really good value here. So you'll get all these on the same day, be able to go make some plays on those as well. So first off, what I always like to do is just start with kind of a landscape of who's doing well, who's doing about as well as we performed, who's overperforming compared to the spread, so we can see some teams that are consistent winners and some teams that might be some consistent losers for trends overall. So love looking at this expectations and reality graph. We see a lot of teams that are overperforming and underperforming. Again, teams that stand out. Tennessee is doing just amazingly this season against the spread. They got another win against Kentucky where they just blew out and absolutely overperformed the spread. Excuse me. They're doing really, really well. Another team that's doing great. So Tennessee is at 82 points above the spread all season. Duke is at 88. So they're a consistent winner this season. You also have Illinois at plus 89. They're leading the nation, outperforming the spread. And Louisville right there is doing very well as well. A team that's very erratic, but has been overperforming, as you can see as well. Louisville's at plus 79. And a couple others that stand out really, really well. UConn down here, very low expectations, but UConn has been normal bad. They got a win against BC. They're talking about bowl eligibility. So a team that's been pretty productive against the spread overall. And then on the other side of things, we have the teams that have not been doing so well. So the first ones we want to point out, I'm just going to circle both of them, BYU and Miami. Miami is minus 90 points on the season, below expectations on their season point differential compared to the spread. BYU is at 81. So those are the two biggest underperformers this season. Of course, Oklahoma with a couple blowout losses, absolutely underneath there as well. They're fourth with 63.5. Western Michigan down here is third overall. They're negative 80 points. So they're as bad as this BYU Miami section as well. The other ones to look at are you've got Nebraska in here as well. They're number 5th overall, 62.5 points below the spread. And those are really the big ones that stand out. You see these teams, most of the other teams are kind of within expectations. There's some teams who are expected to be good that are being better than they were expected. So that's Texas, that's TCU, that's Kansas State, for instance. You can see all 3 of those up here. There's some teams who are expected to be very bad and are doing better than you thought. You've got Buffalo, Troy, Kansas, Georgia Southern, Ohio, all down here. And then, your elite teams up top. You've got the teams that are expected to be good and are very good here in the top right. Your Ohio State, your Georgia, your Alabama, your Michigan. So all 4 of those teams, high expectations coming into the season. They've done pretty well, or about where the spread projected them to be this entire season. Worth noting, Alabama has been doing well. They have that 80 or that 21 point spread against Texas where they only won by 1, and they're still able to, slightly below the line. So they're still kind of overperforming there. And then, some teams down in this bottom right that haven't been doing as well as you expected. And then the teams down here that were expected to do poorly in this bottom left quadrant, your Colorado States, your New Mexico, Boston College, Auburn, Central Michigan, Hawaii, UMass, the teams that they expected to be bad. So if we're looking at some consistent winners, some consistent losers, these are teams that have done the worst against the spread this season. As we go into the matchups, let's go ahead and look at kind of the college football landscape for this Power 5 team. So this is opponent adjusted EPA per play efficiency. And when we talk about this, we're talking about how do teams perform relative to who they've played. So how well do you perform against who you've played? Opponent adjusting makes this a little more sustainable, a little more predictive. And so we've got some really interesting highlights here, especially as we go through some matchups. So, Ohio State obviously is our first overall, our best team. They're doing great. Didn't quite cover against Penn State last week, but they have a better offense than anyone and the third best defense overall behind Illinois and Alabama. So they're leading that top right quadrant. Georgia and Michigan, both defense heavy teams that are playing really, really efficient offense early on. Alabama and Illinois have great defenses over here to the right. They're struggling with offense. Up top, you've got your Tennessees, your UCLAs, your Southern Cal, TCU, all these back here, Oregon, North Carolina, Washington, these teams that have really good offenses but really bad defenses. And then on the bottom right, your Louisville, Kentucky, your Pitt, your Iowa State, Missouri, Virginia, Georgia Tech, Iowa, Rutgers, Virginia Tech, all these teams are like, hey man, you just can't score at all, but you're playing okay defense. And then in the bottom right, you're really, really bad teams, just teams that can't do either thing well. So let's point out a couple matchups that we're going to look at this week. I'm going to do one G5 one to start off, so they're not on this graph, and that's all right. But then we're going to go right into Alabama LSU. So I'm picking this one right here, and I'll just kind of link Alabama and LSU graphically because you can see that LSU is a little bit more in the good offense category and not as good defense, whereas Alabama is exclusively in the very, very good defense and just okay offense. So when we're looking at this game and thinking about just on the merits, the basic levels of team quality, we see that both of them excel at one thing, LSU at offense, Alabama at defense, but they're both kind of mediocre in the other. Alabama's mediocre at offense, LSU's mediocre at defense. So that's going to affect our game script and kind of how we look at those overall. Another game I really like here, because you know me, I'm the offensive-minded guy and think that offense is how teams win games, is going to feature a great offense and an okay defense. So we've got North Carolina, who is, one of the top 10 offenses in the Power 5. And they're going to face Virginia, who is one of the better defenses, but just not very good at offense overall. Virginia's offense is barely better than Georgia Tech, Iowa, Virginia Tech. They're on the same level as Northwestern, Colorado, Vanderbilt, just not very good there. So we have a split between offense and defense, which is going to make an interesting matchup. You can see these two teams are about as extreme a matchup as you're going to get. Virginia's all the way in the bottom right in terms of efficiency. They're really, really good at defense, really, really bad at offense. North Carolina is the exact opposite. Their defense is the cure for the common offense, and their offense is just elite. So really big spread there. That matchup, I believe, is going to favor the offense. The last Power 5 matchup that I'm going to look at this week is going to be Notre Dame and Clemson. So we can find both of these teams here. We find Notre Dame just in that bottom right quadrant. They're just above average in defense and just below average on offense. Clemson, a little bit better on defense than Notre Dame and a little bit better than offense. So they're just across that axis of average there. Whereas Notre Dame is almost average in offense and average and above average on defense. Clemson is above average on offense and on defense there. So those two teams relative position really close here, but we have one kind of funky stat that I think will be very important to understand when we're talking about these games. So we got 3 Power 5 matchups, 1 Group 5 matchup. I'll get to that one first. LSU, very good at offense, kind of bad at defense. Alabama, very good at defense, not that great at offense. UNC, very, very good at offense, very, very bad at defense. Virginia, very, very bad at offense, very, very good at defense. And then Clemson and Notre Dame, who are very, very similar, very, very close, but there's a reason why they're so different here. So that's kind of your landscape of college football and which teams are doing well, which teams have been winners, which teams look poised and balanced, which teams seem like they're a little imbalanced. And from here, we'll go into our from here, we'll go into the exact matchups and get some actual plays and some best bets here. So let's start with BYU versus Boise State. This line has been 7. It's been 8. I think you can still get it. I think you can still get it at 8 now. But I really like this matchup. My numbers have this projected as about an 8-point win for BYU. But I think that, for Boise State. But I think that this is just going to be so much better of a team for Boise State than their aggregate statistics are telling us. And so I'm going to go with the Broncos here at home to cover. If you can get that at 7.5, all the better. If you can get that at 7, I think right now I'm pulling up this line to make sure that I'm not giving you false information. Boise. Yeah, so I have minus 7.5. You can still get it for minus 105. So that's great. I would absolutely go for that. That's going to be the first official play here. Some pretty stark differences between these teams and some pretty stark defensive issues with BYU. So first and foremost, BYU is 71st in adjusted EPA per play margin, even despite having a very good offense, just because their defense has been so terrible. So they're 71st overall. Oh, let's get my pointer going. What's going on with that? They're 71st overall, but they're a really big split here, 29th on offense and then 116th on defense. So very, very bad split. They're their defense is 119th on early downs, 116th on late downs, 116th against the pass, 112th against the rush. Like, this defense is one of the worst units in college football this year. They're probably going to have to make a change. BYU allowing 31.1 points per game. They're 4-5 off of a season where they were talking about coming to be, playoff team. They beat USF, eked out a win at home versus Baylor, but got beat down by Oregon, lost against a pretty bad Notre Dame team, got beat down by Arkansas, got beat down by Liberty, and lost to ECU at home. So they're in the midst of a 4-game skid here. I don't know if this is a chance for a get-right game. Boise, 6-2, had an issue earlier this season. They lost an understandable game to Oregon State where they just turned over the ball a bunch. They lost a really embarrassing game at UTEP. Since then, 4 straight wins against good teams. 3 of those have been double-digit wins. They're cruising. So you've got kind of opposite trends for both of these teams here, which leads me to think that that trend's going to continue and BYU is going to underperform. BYU 29.4 points per game, 31.1 points allowed. Boise State 28.9 points per game at 17.4 points per game allowed. So pretty big split defensively just on the points. And here's something that really worries me. BYU's allowing 216 pass yards per game. They're allowing 420.9 total yards per game. That's better than Boise's season average. Boise's going to have plenty of opportunity to keep this offense rolling, win another game at home. Boise is 23rd overall in EPA per play margin. Their offense has been worse than their defense, 62nd compared to 11th. But on the whole, that's gotten better the last couple of games. As they've been improving, especially in the pass offense the last couple of weeks. They haven't been as bad as 81st. That number is moving up. So they're really going to be able to attack this BYU defense on multiple levels overall. And if we look at kind of some important splits, the big issue for Boise State's defense has been explosive plays. If you watch that UTEP game, for instance, or that Oregon State game, they gave up big play scores. BYU's offense has really needed long sustained drives. They've really needed long sustained drives. They're 27th in echo rate, but they're 99th in points per echo. So they're not getting those big quality, those big play touchdowns. They're getting across the 40 and then they're kicking a field goal sometimes. So that's going to be really important for Boise State's defense is to play that bend don't break. I think they'll be able to. Finally, BYU 82nd on 3rd and 4th down success compared to Boise State's 25th. So BYU's offense has not been as good as I think a lot of people thought it was going to be going into the game or going into the season. And their defense has been just worse than anyone could have imagined. On the other side, Boise State's defense has been fine. Their offense has struggled at times, but they're improving over the last couple of weeks. So I'm going to ride with the Broncos at home here. I think this is a smart play. If you can get this at 7.5, I would even take it at 8 because then you get to push if it is 8. So at 7.5, 8, I think is a fine bet here for Boise State at home. An offense that's rapidly improving against a defense who's been really bad this season. Next play, big game, big rivalry game. I could just say right here at the beginning, Alabama on the road. That's it, right? Like that's really all you need to know to start out here is Alabama is just very bad on the road. But especially against an LSU team who's looking to kind of salvage this season. I won't say salvage is maybe too big of a word. They're 6-2. They're 4-1 in conference. They've only lost to Tennessee and then an early game to FSU that in reality they should have won. I don't know that I think they'll win here, but I think this is going to be closer than a lot of people expect. Alabama on the season, 43.1 points per game, 16.6 points allowed. LSU, 35.1 points per game, 21.1 points allowed. Both teams averaging well over 400 yards of offense, and LSU is allowing a little bit more, a little bit worse than a little more than 300 yards per game, whereas Alabama is under 300 yards per game. But let's, if you go back and we look at our universe graph, we see like LSU has an offense that's going to be able to keep up with Alabama's defense. Alabama's offense might not be as good to challenge LSU as say Tennessee was, right? Tennessee all the way up here. Even Florida State, much better offense than Alabama, the team that beat LSU, and LSU has gotten better week over week. So when we're looking at these teams and kind of debating the merits here, I think that 13.5 is where I see this line. That's a little bit too much for me to trust Alabama on the road. We saw earlier this season, they've almost lost to Texas despite being 21-point favorites. On the road, Arkansas, they went to Arkansas and let the Hogs stay in that game in the fourth quarter. And then at Tennessee, they lost on the road. I really think that Alabama on the road has some serious issues overall. And so I like the Tigers here, just one, situationally for that spot. And two, if we kind of dive into the differences here, I think that they're pretty good. So, Alabama 8th overall in EPA per play. LSU is 11th. A little bit of inverse like we saw on the graph there. LSU is 12th on offense, 48th on defense. Alabama's 26th on offense, 15th on defense. So, the pieces are there for Alabama to be the better team overall, but I think a couple of issues stand out where I believe that LSU can keep this close. One, points per quality possession. LSU is one of the worst teams in the nation at allowing quality possessions. They're 90th in echo rate, 55.6. So they're 90th, 55.6 of opponent drives are big play touchdowns or have a first down across the 40 or scoring opportunities. But they're only allowing 2.5 points per quality possession. So they're playing that absolute bend don't break. They're going to force Alabama in a short field with less space to make decisions, to have their reads progress, to have their offensive linemen have to give Bryce Young time. And I think LSU really knows that when they can shorten the field, they don't have to pressure Bryce Young and let Bryce Young for Alabama just, scramble, make a play, extend a throw. What they're going to be able to do is kind of bottle him up and say, hey, we're going to sit back. We're not going to let you beat us with the extended play. We're going to make you beat us downfield, especially in a short field. So if LSU can make this Alabama offense that's historically been sluggish, especially on the road, in letting them in holding them to field goals as opposed to touchdowns, I think that this sets up really well for LSU to cover here. Another thing to look at, Alabama's been kind of bad on 3rd and 4th downs. They're 57th in 3rd and 4th down success. Well, LSU has been 58th. So there's kind of a weakness on weakness there. I'd give that a little bit more to the defense. I think that LSU will be able to exploit that relative weakness for Alabama. On the other side of the ball, LSU extremely balanced, 17th EPA per pass, 11th EPA per rush. Alabama's been slightly worse against the rush, but not in the sense of against quarterbacks. So I think Jaden Daniels being able to be mobile and move around will be a different element of the run game that LSU is going to seek to exploit in this game. as well. Alabama has a strong field position advantage in both sides of the ball. They're 12th in field position allowed on defense. LSU is 105th in field position allowed on offense. On the flip side, LSU 94th at field position on defense, and Alabama 33rd. But those LSU numbers are drugged down by a couple turnovers early in games. And so not as worried about that. The last thing that I think really important here is rush rate over expected. LSU is very balanced, 56th pass happy offense, whereas Alabama's throwing the ball a ton. They're 23rd. I think that if LSU can force Alabama to run the ball a little more and not pass as much, they'll be able to slow this game down and keep this within 2 touchdowns. So if you can get this 13.5, you can get it 14, all the better. We're making sure that my numbers are current. Let's see. I have LSU. Yeah, 13.5 right now. So that would be my inclination. I could see this game being 10, 11, 9. Alabama up by a touchdown. LSU scores a garbage time touchdown late. There's a lot that could go right here for LSU at home on a Saturday night. So going to take the Tigers here. Going to roll with them. Maybe they win. Maybe they get a little chaos. There's certainly worse bets than LSU money line at home in a big rivalry game here. But if you can get the points, that's all the better there for you. All right, 2 more games. First, going to go to the ACC, again, North Carolina and Virginia. The big issue for me here, being kind of brief on this, is just that North Carolina can move the ball and can score at will with no problems, no second thought. They're first in EPA per pass. They're passing, 3.6% more than the average team. They're 5th on offense, EPA 11th in offensive success rates, 11th in net points per drive. They're 2nd in points per quality possession, despite being 119th in field position. Yes, North Carolina is starting an awful field position. Their defense is not setting them up at all, and they're still just able to score. Drake May is a guy. He's the guy. He's great. 2 quarterbacks have an average depth of target greater than 10 and an adjusted accuracy of 78% or more, and it's Bryce Young and Drake May. Drake May is the guy. He's going to be able to score against this Virginia defense, and this Virginia offense is just not going to be able to score. They're 119th in EPA per play on offense, 121st in the run game, 92nd in the pass, 94th at quality possession rate, 124th at points per quality possession. When they get across the 40, they're averaging less than a field goal. Think about that. When they get a first down across the 40, Virginia is averaging less than a field goal. They cannot score enough. This is a straight play, very easy here. I know it's a bad North Carolina defense on the road, but this is a team that just absolutely. You saw last week. You saw them play Georgia Tech in just an awful game. They can't score the ball. They're 16.9 points per game compared to 41.8 for North Carolina. So I don't know that we'll get not Georgia Tech, Miami. So the last 2 weeks, 16 points versus Georgia Tech, 14 points versus 12 points versus Miami. Just very, very bad. Their last 5 games have been 20 points, 17 points, 17 points, 16 points, 12 points. Virginia cannot score. North Carolina's points the last 5 games, 42, 38, 27, 41, 32. They can score. And they're going to be able to boat race Virginia and get some big explosive plays. North Carolina sitting with 1 loss, could up in some stuff in the ACC, but this one seems like low hanging fruit here with just how poorly Virginia is trending. I was expecting this line to be at like 10 and then not bet it, but because we have it at 7.5, gonna go ahead and take that one as well. Finally, one more game, big game, ACC versus Notre Dame. The big deal here is not so much the stats, because if you look at these on their face, they're all very similar. Clemson's 15th or 39th on offense, 22nd on defense, 65th for Notre Dame EPA per margin, 82nd on offense, 38th on defense. We saw in the graph when we opponent adjust them, they're very close to each other. Both teams are, pretty okay generally. Clemson a lot more balanced, 43rd in EPA per play on passing, 43rd in rushing. They're 33rd in passing defense, 21st in rushing defense. And sure, Notre Dame just beat Syracuse, just beat them pretty soundly. And you might think, all right, is Notre Dame figuring it out? Are they moving the ball? Notre Dame ran the ball more against Pitt, 19 percentage points more than the average team runs against against Syracuse last week. So, I mean, just absolutely were able to take advantage of Syracuse's bad rushing defense. That's not going to happen again this season. Clemson is allowing 87.9 rush yards per game. Notre Dame is averaging 186.6 rush yards per game. They're not going to be able to run more than they're not going to be able to run against Syracuse or run against Clemson the way they ran against Syracuse. Syracuse was before the Notre Dame game, teams ran against Syracuse 3.7 percentage points more than average. The Notre Dame game, the Irish ran 19.9 percentage points more than expected against Syracuse. Absolutely took advantage of a bad run defense and exploited it. They're not going to be able to do that again this week. Clemson is going to force them to pass. They're going to put a lot of pressure on this passing offense and keep them behind the chains with the run game. Clemson's defense should smother them. If you get a halftime lead for Notre Dame, I think that a Notre Dame team total would be a fine way to attack this as well. This has fallen a lot. This was a touchdown at one point, I think. This is now, I see Clemson minus 3.5. And so I was prepared to take this, 5, 6, 7 points even. I think this is going to be a pretty one-sided affair, and that Clemson is going to really get a dominant win here because Notre Dame can't just run the ball against them. So looking at this one, I think this is a case of styles. Both teams are very run-heavy, and when Notre Dame's been successful, they've been able to run the ball well. They ran the ball well and a lot and more than you would expect given the down distance in the yard line against Syracuse, and they were able to win that game. They're not going to be able to move the ball that well against Clemson. We've seen what Clemson did to Illinois. Clemson did to Syracuse in terms of stopping their rushing offense. And so I'm going to take Clemson here. Again, minus 3.5 is great. Minus 4 is great. This is one where, again, just clash of styles. So 4 bets for this week. We have Clemson minus 3.5. We have North Carolina minus 7.5. We have LSU plus 13.5. Some places you get that extra point. And Boise State minus 7.5 or minus 8 are going to be my 4 plays this week. I think there's some really interesting matchups of trends and styles and kinds of teams. So hopefully your bets cash this week. Looking forward to next week talking about some more games, diving deep into the stats, analytics, and numbers behind the game. This has been Parker's Previews. Make sure you go follow Hit the Book CFB, me on Twitter at Stats of War. And you can get all this great college football content from the Hammer about how to be a smarter investor and a better consumer of college football content. Best of luck this weekend. Catch you next time.